So we're all set to dive into our first plenary. The first plenary for the day is India at the Helm, Forging a Responsible Path Ahead. The session will explore how India can set the direction for global adoption of responsible renewable energy. The session will be moderated by Mr. Adi Shankar, who is Distinguished Fellow at REI and former Secretary, Department of Industry Policy. Mr. Shankar has over 40 years of rich experience in public service. He has held key positions in Government of India and played a pivotal role in drafting Energy Act 2003. May I please welcome Mr. Adi Shankar on the dais, please. We also have an illustrious panel for the first session, and I would like to invite our speakers on the dais as well. Dr. Vibha Dhawan, Director General TERI, Mr. Deepak Gupta, Director General NSCFI, Ms. Nidhi Sareen, Director GAP India, Mr. Pinaki Haldar, Director of National Program Lendesa. He will be joining us through a VC link. Mr. Rajat Verma, Founder and CEO Loham Cleantech, Ms. Yuji Sujatha, Head Global Partnerships and Multilateral Invest India. May I please request the speakers to join me on the dais. Welcome, everyone. Mr. Shankar, I hand over the dais to you to begin the session.
I must say that I'm delighted to be here, because this is, I think, a core issue for not only those of us who are interested in the sector, but for the whole of the country. And we have a very distinguished panel. All that I would do right now is to read out the questions which the organizers feel that our panelists should try and address. I will leave it to them to choose which ones they want to address and in what manner, but I'll just read out the questions. But before I do that, I want to make one modification to the main theme, which is that we are already pursuing a very responsible path ahead, and we are, in my view, a global leader in the whole energy transition and the journey to a carbon-free world. So it's not something that we have to achieve, we are already achieving it. With that caveat, I'll read the questions. So how can India effectively achieve its ambitions, RE targets, while ensuring the efficient utilization of resources? What advisory role can think tanks, academic institutions play in guiding stakeholders towards environmentally and socially responsible energy transition strategies? How can the RE industry contribute to sectoral sustainability through responsible mineral sourcing, land allocation, and water management? What are the challenges and opportunities for integrating resource efficiency and circular economy principles into the RE value chain for effective end-of-life management of resources? What strategies should developers employ to ensure sustainable land acquisition, participatory government and community engagement in RE projects? Additionally, what challenges and opportunities are associated with innovative models such as multi-land use for secondary energy generation, agri-PV, in expediting clean energy deployment while promoting community involvement? What are the primary environmental and social considerations accompanying the expansion of utility-scale solar and wind projects in India? How can CSOs partner with policymakers, industry stakeholders, and local communities to advocate for sustainable and inclusive energy transition policies and practices? What roles can investors, funders play in promoting responsible, sustainable practices in RE and fostering gender and marginal group empowerment within the RE sector? What role can policy and regulation, both at the center and the state level, play in promoting responsible, sustainable practices in RE and fostering gender and marginal group empowerment within the RE sector? Now, these are all very important questions, and I am so glad we'll be discussing these, because these are questions which normally tend to get ignored in our enthusiasm to achieve big results. So with that, may I request Vibha for your comments?
Thank you so much. Now, it goes without saying that what is happening to the planet, and perhaps the statement saying save the planet is wrong, because now we have reached to the situation that if we have to survive, if the human race has to survive, it is essential for us to take care of the planet. IPCC report, and earlier we were talking about that the global temperature, we must arrest it at 1.5 degrees. But unfortunately, we are already 1.15 degrees above the pre-industrialization time. We are expecting that 1.5 degrees increase will happen in 2030s itself, and maybe it will be somewhere around 2 degrees. Now, what we really need to look into that with 1.15 degrees, which has happened in such a long time, what is the impact on us, each one of us? We talk about the heat waves, we talk about loss in productivity. We are also talking in terms of that for human comfort or otherwise, the air conditioning load itself, which is going to be in next 20, 30 years, is going to be so large, the amount of electricity that will be used for it, and so on. We also neglect, because you and I can afford air conditioners, but there are millions. Look at the farmer who has to produce crops for us. They will not have access to the electricity or air conditioning. Even if somehow we say they'll change their timings of working in the field, what happens to the poor plants? They are standing there. So for them also there is increase in temperature and therefore loss in productivity that is predicted in years to come. So it becomes imperative for us that we have to arrest this temperature. Of course, there are many factors, but the most important factor contributing to the global climate change is energy. It's the usage of energy for various purposes. It also goes for even agriculture, because we normally consider plants to be clean and we say agriculture is a clean activity. We don't realize that that also contributes directly and indirectly to the changing climate. You look at the use of fertilizers, that has gone up. Rightly so, I'm not at all advocating that go organic. I'm saying that it is that to feed so many mouths, we really need to increase our agriculture productivity, and that's only possible with use of irrigation and fertilizers, pesticides, and so on. Now, what happens? You are talking of 80% of your natural resource, water, fresh water is used for agriculture purposes. And we are already talking many cities that are going, the water table is going below the acceptable levels to an extent that heavy metals are coming in water. They're entering our food chain and indirectly or directly impacting our health. And in years to come, perhaps there will be no water. Let's talk of fertilizers. How do they add to changing climate? First of all, for the production of fertilizer itself, you require energy. And then when you use many of these fertilizers, they are broadcasted, or even if you use machines like urea applicator and all, it is part of the fertilizer which is used by the plant, and quite a bit of it goes to the water underneath, and that pollutes your water. And you look at the health burden, because you are talking of many states where incidences of cancers are becoming higher and higher. So it is the immediate impact becomes what you see as diseases like cancer, but the long-term impact is on the environment because of practices which are not sustainable. Now coming to renewable energy, and that is where it is that the fact of the matter remains, India as a country has to develop. We are talking about India being a developed country in next 20, 30 years, which is possible. Let's also look into why India lagged behind, and that was largely because there was hardly any fossil fuel available to us. And with import of fossil fuels, the cost of production, the production within the country was comparatively higher, and we were non-competitive in the international market. And for many goods, imports became cheaper than producing our own. Now there is an opportunity. Now, why we need solar, why we need renewable, there are two things. One is that as a country, we have to develop. And we are also, very rightly, because if any country has to succeed, it has to be a manufacturing and innovative country. We are blessed, I'll say, in terms of manpower also, because we have the youngest workforce in the world. And we also have responsibility to channelize them. And therefore, training in young workforce in green energy is our responsibility. The other thing is that this young force, and if you look at the global level, just look at CEOs of major companies and you'll find that there are Indians at top positions. Why? There are two qualities in us. One is we have innovative minds, and second is we are hardworking. And therefore, if we channel this workforce in the proper direction, there is no reason that we will be finding innovative solutions that will be far more suitable for our country. I'm not undermining importance of partnerships. That goes without saying, because whatever, the world has limited resources. So if you have invented something in any part of the world, I suppose it must be shared. COVID has taught us one thing, that we only have one planet to live in. We can't go anywhere. And the other thing is, whatever happens in one part of the world has immediate impact on the other part. And that goes without saying for issues related to climate change. So for the West also, for the developed part of the world as well, it is very important that they ensure that the developing world also have access to best of the technologies so that their emissions gets reduced. The other thing is that it's something like one shoe doesn't fit all. So therefore, looking at India, which is a country of small and medium enterprises, we may not be needing sophistication to the extent it has already been developed. For SMEs, we require a different set of technologies. We also have another responsibility to ensure that there are enough jobs for our workforce. And therefore, what we need is blend or customizing that technology to our needs. But rather than saying that all the technologies will come with hefty IPR fees and so on, it is also essential that these technologies are made accessible to the different industries in different parts of the world. I'm not saying just India. It is that to the developing part of the world, those technologies should be made available. The other important thing that I see in future to be very important is the changing landscape in energy. We all say that perhaps industrialized nations are responsible for climate change. Because of industrialization, climate change has occurred. But let's also look into the benefits. Like, we all are benefited because of industrialization. We all use those products all the time. Our own development is based on the products which have been made available to us. And no one had done it knowingly that these are going to be the negative impacts. It was whatever technologies were best available at that time, those have been used. India, we are developing, and perhaps when we talk about that 2/3 of infrastructure is yet to be built, that also gives us opportunity to build that infrastructure as green as possible. We don't have to break anything and rebuild. It is more of that we have to build, and we have opportunities available to us. So that becomes very encouraging, and fortunately, I'll put it this way, in India, from the top it starts, the commitments which were made by the Honorable Prime Minister in Glasgow, thereafter what the goals which we have set for the country and the way we are trying to achieve it, that is commendable. We talk about ESG, that the companies will also have to talk about environment in a big way. And that is something like what get mired get managed, and therefore if they have to do the reporting in terms of their environment sustainability, it is not mandatory, it is voluntary today, but in years to come, when there is going to be a peer pressure and from the stakeholders as well, because you and I will also perhaps be buying products from more responsible companies. So the entire landscape, right from where the subsidies should go, right from the farmer, agro photovoltaics, you are talking about solar pumps and so on. So right from that level, going to the next level of solar rooftops, all the way to the hydrogen mission, there are commitments from the government, and there are commitments in terms of energy transition. And I'm very happy to report that along with Ministry of Power, TERI is setting up an institute on energy transition in Hyderabad. So one of the responsibilities of this center will also be to train the right manpower. Because for any technologies, there are different stages. Even when you develop the technology, to reach it to the end users, you need awareness creation. You need acceptability of that technology and responsible use of the technology. And that is where the trained manpower becomes very essential. You need to validate the technology and so on. So I'll stop here and maybe I'll come again when there is another opportunity.
Thank you. Now I have the privilege of requesting a friend, a fellow crusader for the right causes, and very distinguished Mr. Deepak Gupta, who's been Secretary MNRE and continues to push the right causes with great energy. Over to you, Deepak.
Thank you. Thank you, Ajay. I'm actually wearing the hat of ex-Secretary MNRE rather than the Director General of the industry, because the views may not necessarily match and what we are discussing today, the larger policy context. I will focus only on one small part of what solar energy can and should do, in my view. And I think that particular thing cuts across all the questions that you have raised. I think we have to not think of 2030 or 2025, and we need to think of 2050 as a one target date. Also, I need to think of the amount of solar energy which will be required. It's not 100 gigawatt or 200 gigawatt or even 300 gigawatt. It will be 1500 or 2000 gigawatt. And thirdly, whenever we think of energy or renewable energy, I think it's very important that we integrate it with other issues of sustainability and also see the economic analysis, not only a financial analysis, how responsible energy can contribute to the well-being of the people of India, other than just decarbonization. So if I look at all this, on the one hand, you have a strategy today almost entirely, and I think in general, this is what the public thinking is also, that solar will come through utility scale solar. I think that's the general emphasis, even in the policy making establishment, all the institutions, state governments, etc. On the other hand, solar has, for the first time in history, provided an opportunity of generating power where you will consume it. So the obvious answer is, both Mr. Tiwari and Mr. Mathur mentioned about the land problem. So when I look at the scale of 1500 gigawatt, land problems will definitely come. I have no solution how we can address that land problem, except that perhaps government should, and in fact, when we were planning the solar mission, one of the policy things we had planned at that time was that government itself should now only, that means 2010-12, identify huge tracts of land at the best possible area and acquire them or start acquire them to make solar parks. in a very integrated manner for the transmission system. But I think that has not happened. So, what should be my deployment strategy for 1500 gigawatt? I think that's the fundamental question. I am not in favor of big utility plants because it requires huge transmission infrastructure. They are could be to extreme weather events. It will divide the country into producers and consumers. And I am in favor of decentralized solar, which is its strength. And if I have decentralized solar, I can improve the quality of power supply. I will ensure that the discoms benefit because their cost of supply there is much higher. The farmers will get electricity in the daytime. The quality of power will improve. Maybe farmers' incomes will increase. Maybe there'll be employment generation. Many things will happen, and I will feed from electricity from below. Many of you, I do not know whether you even recollect or even have thought about that in the solar mission, there were many elements. One was 20,000 gigawatt of target, which has been the sort of center of attention that it was not ambitious enough. But there was one component which was 100 megawatt of 1 to 2 megawatt plants at the tail end of the grid. It was to experiment and evaluate technically, economically, financially, what would happen if I were to build thousands of solar plants at the tail end of the grid in the country. Nobody's bothered about it. Nobody's evaluated it. Nobody has discussed it. It's a unfortunate thing, but it hasn't happened. And this is one thing which you said think tanks can do to strategize. So I am saying, and now if I have to build decentralized plants, should it be ground mounted? Yes, it could be ground mounted where land is available easily and it is not at all productive. But in most places, this is not so. Large parts of the country have rain-fed agriculture, and the little pilots that have been done here and there at the moment show that a rain-fed land can be converted by agro-solar, elevated solar structure plant into 365 days agriculture. And the nearest one is in Delhi, where everybody is benefiting, including the farmer whose income has not doubled, but it has quadrupled and more. Agricultural production has increased. So I see the future for solar is in thousands and thousands of 1 or 2 megawatt agrivoltaic plants, which will benefit everybody. Now the question is why it is not happening. A, because we are not thinking about it. B, because there is a slightly higher cost. And how do I meet that cost? So we need to have a tariff which will allow that cost. We talk about industry. Industry in open access gets a lot of benefits. They are saving the tariff which they pay to the discom and getting solar much cheaper. So actually, while they are claiming decarbonization, they are doing it for profit, not just because they want to be responsible. So there is an opportunity for them through open access to buy this kind of power through agrovoltaics, and this can be done all across the country. And in this way, every village can be its own producer. And we can think about how I add mini grids to it. When we were in those years in MNRE, mini grids were coming up to provide energy access to the villages because energy access was a big problem. But now I think mini grids can be part of the total power producing infrastructure. And how we can do it is something which we need to study. I often thought in those days after visiting Bihar and Jharkhand and other places, if a women's self-help group can become the entrepreneur to run a mini grid, imagine the consequences in the rural areas or just by this one thing of what could happen. So many things could happen. So I would argue that we should plan to have about, I don't know how many hundreds of gigawatt of agrovoltaic plants, and the think tanks and the government should think how to make it possible. To my mind, this will be the next agricultural revolution and the most responsible way forward for renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you. I am so glad you've drawn attention to the merits of decentralized solar power. I think we've gone a little too far in one direction, and course correction is overdue. And the recent announcement of the Prime Minister of 1 crore households getting rooftop solar panels is a big step in course correction.
But I just wanted to make a comment on that. After you finish. Yes.
And the other dimension which I would like to emphasize is that all the questions that I posed about, responsible RE generation or sustainable or RE which takes care of the concerns of the marginalized communities, all those questions become minor questions if you have decentralized generation. They are really material questions when you have large solar projects of 100 megawatts or 200 megawatts. So with that, one sentence before I come to the other panelists who are waiting to say what they want to say.
I'm very happy that we have going in a big way for rooftop, because that is also the principle that you are producing where you are consuming. But one thing we need to consider, there is a cost to DISCOM, because I'm taking away, unless I'm giving it to the persons who have 1 or 2 or 3 kilowatt demand, which will be very difficult to do, although it is desirable. And DISCOM is losing money because their other customer is going away, and the government is giving a very big subsidy. So my only request is, and we should examine this, treat my agrovoltaics also as rooftop, and just give that subsidy, and I will change the world, I can assure you.
Nidhi Serene, you have so much experience and your CV is around, so I won't eat into your speaking time. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting. I'm delighted to be a part of the esteemed panel here. I have been listening to all the thoughts, and I'm glad that the thoughts that I've also put down on paper are aligned to the different speakers who are there in the panel and who've spoken so far, and also with the speakers in the previous session. I'm very glad to see that the Responsible RE initiative has brought together or is still trying to bring together the rounded perspectives of how different stakeholders, be it policymakers, think tank, investors, impact makers, how they are coming together to bring or to accelerate RE in a more responsible and environmentally sensitive way. Now, Dr. Gupta actually highlighted certain numbers, and I'm again trying to talk about the scale that we are looking at here, and I'm talking about a short run here. Looking at the commitments that India has made at international scale platforms of 500 gigawatt. The short-term target is till 2030 only. And the investments which are at the scale of 13.9 trillion for the energy transition that we are talking about. We are talking about massive things happening. We are talking about massive infrastructure going on ground. We are talking about massive skills to be deployed. We are talking about massive jobs to be created. We are talking about massive opportunities to have people-centric transformations that we are talking about here. While we are touching all of these things and we are touching lives here, it has to be done in a very responsible way. Otherwise, as you also highlighted, Dr. Dhawan, that it can go either ways. Talking about any perspective here, be it a policymaker's or a funder's perspective, I think the 3 stages on which the responsibility matrix has to be applied is on, let's say, conceptualizing and ideating stages. We are talking about implementation phases where the responsibility lens has to be applied very, very succinctly. And then collaborating for proliferate and scaling up different deployments, not only in a state, in the countrywide, like let's say in India, or we are talking about globally, because we are not alone. Energy transition does not see boundaries. We are not talking about a closed box here. We are talking across geographies here. Dr. Mathur also talked about the technologies, the concepts, and the innovation around that. He was very right in saying that the technology is fast changing. The responsibility in terms of deploying more resources, deploying more brains into a more environmentally sustainable technology, I think, is the first and foremost thing that we are talking about. Having more sustainable renewable energy solution, and I'm technology agnostic here. I'm not only saying solar, I'm not saying wind parks, I'm saying any kind of technology, be it even certain bioenergy things that we are talking about. How do you integrate the marginalized groups? There's a huge opportunity to integrating women in the value chains of, let's say, bioenergy, for example, and how do you involve them to utilize the waste, quote unquote waste part, into a more useful way of utilizing it in the form of energy. Then best case replication. I mean, while we are looking at things which may have worked in a particular geography, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that they may or may not work. I mean, we've seen green revolution work and doing wonders, but now we are also seeing some of the negatives that are coming in. And while we are talking about the blue revolution, if I may say, in terms of the colors of the solar panel, we also have to be cognizant of the fact of what happens 25 years from now. Are we talking about the end of life as a massive donor or a funder? Am I integrating those ESG principles when I'm deploying massive large-scale plants? Am I also looking at or maybe just for the lack of a better example here, I'm deploying solar pumps in areas. Are they environmentally sensitive areas where I'm deploying this? And I think Dr. Mathur also talked about the tool where he's looking at hotspots which should not be touched by certain technologies. Circularity, and I've heard that word multiple times since morning. What are the principles to be included right from the point while we are even starting to think about renewable energy deployments? What is it that we are talking about? And we have to be forward-looking here and looking at 30 years from down the line on how are we actually seeing how are we disposing our wind blades or the solar panels that we have. Do we already have recycling facilities? Is somebody actually investing in those facilities? What is it that my money is going to yield, or not my money, as a taxpayer, I was trying to say, as a taxpayer's money, I'm saying, what is it that this money is going to do to the lives of people 30 years from now? So, and also looking at implementation, what are the ESG principles? And this comes across in the two phases. I mean, we are talking about conceptualizing and looking at paper on how implementation would look at, but also coming deep down into the implementation when it comes to the deployments. Are we doing the due diligences in the with the purview of assessing the environmental impacts, the sociological, the biodiversity, the impact on the forest? We had a great speaker in the morning who was touching about how forests are impacting, how pump storage, the hotspot of pump storage are on a vicinity of the forest. What are the people-centric deployment opportunities? And that's a positive opportunity that we have to have a lot of jobs and skills to be created. Dr. Dhawan, you spoke about the Energy Transition Center. But what are the levels that we are talking about? Are we also talking about the deployments there? Are we also talking about the capacities which need to be built and the skills which we need to have for let's say the 1500 gigawatt of solar to be put in? Where are we? I mean, we are talking about transitions from coal and through the 3 million odd people who are involved in the coal value chains just in those 2 or 3 states, how are we using this opportunity to migrate them from one skill set to the other skill set? That's a opportunity for jobs and livelihoods. Sustainability perspectives with respect to water ecosystem, I said biodiversity, agri-PV. Dr. Gupta, you were talking about agri-PV. It's a huge opportunity, but we also have to be mindful of the potential land use change that we may be talking about. I mean, from high, from the crops which need high sunlight to a agri-PV crop. I'm not saying this is not a good technology. This is a good technology, offers a lot of opportunities to us. But there have to be certain do's and don'ts when we are talking about more mindful deployments there. And of course, on the other element of collaborations, the work does not stop at one point or at one plant which is being established. Decentralization is a great way to take it forward. And I say do and not stop. We are talking about alliances. We are talking about partnerships which need to be created, which need to be built. And I look forward to more responsibility elements coming forward to accelerating renewable energy deployments. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very useful and valuable concerns which we need to interiorize. May I request Mr. Pinaki Haldar, Head of National Programs, Landesa, who's joining us online. So, over to
thank you. Thank you so much, sir, and all the distinguished panelists. I have been hearing very patiently and with a lot of interest. And the issue what everybody is touching upon mine will be not very much different, but I will just try to start from a reference. As we know, from the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy website, I was looking at some of the figures, and particularly related to land, and trying to make a reference to the land rather. And so far, considering the wind and solar energy so far installed, and I'm talking about ground-mounted solar energy, so about 110 gigawatts that has been installed so far as per the ministry website till December 23. So approximately, I see on an average 5 acres or 2 hectares of land, this is quite land intensive, the renewable energy installation, rather than the fossil fuel energy. So on an average 2 hectares to 5 acres of land, and that gives us a figure of 14,000 square kilometer of land that has already been utilized for considering the entire wind energy and also the ground mounted. I am excluding rooftop. That is a great possibility, as the previous learned speakers, they have touched upon, and decentralized solar energy also. And given 2030 target, we need about 50,000 square kilometer of more land. So the question, the primary environmental considerations and the social considerations that will emerge from land use and habitat loss, and how to address the reduced biodiversity and impact on ecosystem services, as everybody is touching upon. And there will be also environmental impacts when the RE installations are happening due to, and the focus right now is the recycling, reuse of the hazardous and a lot of hazardous waste that will harm the environment, and that will be generated in the value chain. So that is also an area of concern. And the social considerations mainly revolves around the change in land use, as the previous speaker, Ms. Sarin, has touched upon, and its impact on livelihoods. And land is such a dear possession, And this emotional and cultural well-being is so much associated, particularly the marginalized and vulnerable population, the secondary and tertiary tenure holders. The primary tenure holders, of course, the landowners, they will receive compensation, and there are new areas explored after Niti Aayog came into the area of when post 2013, the LAR Act, when it came into force, so there was hardly things moving ahead. And considering the requirement and the focus on the renewable energy, several governments were allowed, as Niti Aayog suggested, to frame rules to ease this situation and remove some of the blocks faced in land procurement, and how responsible land procurement could be. So that's an area increasingly gaining in currency. That what does it mean and how it is possible, and how the potential inequalities, injustices, and conflicts arising out of the land use change could be addressed. What are the possible ways, and which of course affects the marginalized section, including women and indigenous community, more disproportionately. As I was mentioning, the secondary and tertiary tenure holders, mainly focusing on the sharecroppers, the agricultural wage earners. So, but the LAR Act fortunately keeps in consideration everybody who is going to be affected as a result of land procurement. I will come back to CSO's role, but let's have a look on this, how the several governments are trying to address the issue of land use and land use change, and where from the land will come. Primarily, there is a concept of land bank. For all the state governments, as I know, they are creating, or they have already created, a land bank, and that land ideally should be coming from there. Or there is another option, that is converted land or degraded land. So what are the options? And big this, in the eastern region, the thousands of square kilometers of land have rendered unusable due to this coal mines have stopped functioning. So that is another option, and like that, every state might explore wherever it is possible. And of course, the previous speakers have touched upon the multiple land use, and also one concern will be how to prevent land degradation as an outcome of the RE installation, and conservation conservation need to be a component of land use planning whenever it is happening for the RE installation. And we need to be mindful about the local culture, values, and beliefs associated with land and resources. And once over the last couple of years, I have been reading articles and also hearing several environmentalists and other people, knowledgeable people, that use of commons would be a solution, could be a silver bullet solution to the problem. But commons always, as we have seen in Rajasthan, in Gujarat, the nomadic population, the pastoralist, they have this customary right, and their livelihoods mainly are generated by using commons. So we cannot simply exclude this population from our thoughts. So this reducing the stress on natural resources and optimal use of land, that is a concern, that is an area, because when we are talking about, I think lots of people are talking about the same concerns, and also hammering brains to come up with an acceptable solution, and which can actually minimize the socio-economic impact on the locality due to land use change, and the most vulnerable are considered while upholding the rights of the affected community. And another area that equitable benefit sharing, how it has to be, it could be made more responsible and sustainable. The only way is to ensure how equitable benefit sharing could be thought about, and what are the new thoughts coming up to address this concern. And of course, most importantly,
Mr. Haldar, may I request you to be a little brief?
Yeah. Just I am concluding. I am coming to the this role of the CSOs and NGOs. The how to facilitate the local community engagement, local self-government, Gram Sabha, Gram Panchayat, etc. in the diagnostic and decision-making process. That is an important area. And to ensure the voices are heard of everybody concerned. And innovation in job creation, somebody was speaking earlier, and enhancing employability training is a major component, training of the affected community, how they could be more employable, and the benefit sharing, cultural, social considerations is more or less. And one important area for the civil society organizations would be to bring more education and awareness generation into this space of discussion, and also their role could be very important in that. So I'm closing here, and I look forward to other thoughts. Thank
you. And I think this issue which you brought somewhat center stage in your discussion is the customary rights of people who do not own land, but customary rights over that land. Fortunately, India has moved a considerable distance in the last 2 decades, because in the whole land acquisition process, the rights of project-affected persons have been recognized. And I think in the large solar projects, we do need to bring that issue a little more the central stage than it has been till now. May I request Mr. Rajat Verma, founder and CEO of Loham Cleantech, for his comments?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad we are having these conversations around not just energy transition, but around responsible energy transition. Fundamentally believe this whole journey to net zero is not just about energy transition, but essentially about material transition. There's a very significant role that materials are going to play, if not already having started to play, in getting to the goals that we have as a globe. Materials. Some of you may have heard a lot about all these materials which have been deemed critical materials by our government. Not just by our government, by governments all over the world. Lithium, cobalt, nickel, silicon, graphite, rare earths. There are about 50 odd materials that the Ministry of Mines in the country has declared as critical. When we think about these materials, we really have to think about these materials in a very responsible manner. And when I talk about responsibility of materials, I broadly structure that into 3 different aspects of these materials. There is a sourcing part of it, there is the longevity part of it, and then there is the circularity part of it. You've heard a lot about circularity from different speakers earlier as well as right now, which is really a little bit about recycling. But then sourcing and longevity are 2 other things that also have to play a very critical role. Now, the interesting thing about these materials, unlike carbon, unlike organic compounds, is once dug out, you can actually use them forever. You can use them infinitely. Something like a lithium, something like a silicon, something like neodymium. Once you've taken it out of Earth, through the right technology, you can keep using it infinitely, and that is what makes them super, super important in our energy transition initiatives. So when I talk about, which means, yes, you do have to take it out once, but then in that activity of sourcing that material, you have to ensure you're being extremely responsible. What does that mean? Take the case of the critical materials that we talk about today. They are all very geopolitical in nature because they are concentrated in certain geographies globally. They're not present everywhere, which is why they've been deemed critical. In these geographies, are we taking the right steps in extracting the material from Earth, right? And those right steps could be about the people we involve in extracting the material, the technologies that we involve in extracting the material. Just to give you an example, in Chile, lithium is actually merely evaporated in a pond. So you've got almost like a lithium salt pond and a lithium salt sea, if you will, and you evaporate the water to extract or to concentrate the lithium. Is that really the best thing to do? What kind of havoc do you play with the local weather system in evaporating that water and creating patterns which are not common for that system? That's something that we've got to think about. In Congo, which is the primary source of almost 75% of cobalt that we source in this world, it's really a lot of artisan mining that is going on. You've got all these little kids, women, even men, extremely untrained and unaware about the hazards of taking out cobalt. A lot of us do not know a lot of these energy transition materials are inherently heavy and thus inherently carcinogenic in nature. You're putting out sort of unaware people into playing with these materials without the right toolkits, without the right equipments. Are we doing justice to them? On the one hand, yes, I may have these great EVs and great batteries and whatnot, but what kind of irresponsible action am I taking or am I conducting by letting these people play with these materials without the right equipment? So I think that is something that we really have to think, that are we sourcing the material originally the right way? There is no escaping from the fact that they need to be sourced once. We talk about circularity, but to initiate circularity, the starting point is sourcing. The next part that I talked about is longevity. And India actually has been doing a great job in longevity forever, right? When I started my company back in 2016, I was very curious about what was happening. Those of you who are from Delhi must be very familiar with Nehru Place in Delhi, which is a hub of refurbishing activities and repurposing activities, particularly for IT goods. And I was very curious to see all these dead laptop batteries making their way to Shahadra in East Delhi. If again, those of you who are probably maybe from my generation, like when we used to have those old laptop batteries which would stick out from the back of the laptop, I would see all these laptop batteries making their way to Shahadra. Very curious about what was going on with them. So I go to Shahadra and I see a bunch of unorganized kabadiwalas, and they were paying a good bit of money for those laptop batteries, and I didn't know what they were doing with it. And then, lo and behold, these guys were cracking open the batteries, taking out 2 or 3 cells which were still good, right? When your laptop said it has no juice left in it, didn't mean all the cells inside had gone bad. These guys were taking out 2 or 3 cells, converting them into a power bank, and selling that power bank on Amazon. Imagine the ingenuity here, right? That was the kind of longevity activity that they were bringing to the table. India has been extremely good about this forever. And we need to make sure that we actually bring that longevity into our thinking. When I think about a battery, let's say, I'm someone who's driving a two-wheeler, an electric two-wheeler. I need 80, 90 kilometers of range every day. And let's say beyond a point of time, that battery is only giving me 30, 40 kilometers of range. I can do 2 things. One, maybe I can give that battery to someone whose requirement is only 30, 40 kilometers, or I can actually take out that battery and couple it with my solar rooftop to actually store energy, right? That's another example of longevity. This is a principle that India has been following sort of almost, it has been there in our DNA forever, because maybe we are very cost conscious, but it's actually the right thing to do. That longevity reduces the overall carbon impact of taking out that material from planet Earth. The third bit is really all about recycling. Now, recycling is a word that we all use, circularity is a word that we all use, and we all love that word, right? But recycling is quite honestly a very dirty industry. A lot of you who probably have not seen what happens in a recycling company will sort of think that, yes, this is a holy grail. I recycle, I create circularity, and I've done the right thing. No, we've got to make sure that recycling is done the right way. We need policymakers to not just say recycle, we need them to say recycle with the right standards. And again, those standards are about what do you expose your people to, what do you expose the community to, what do you expose the environment to. Those are very important things because, again, remember, we are talking about recycling materials, which could be extremely dangerous, extremely harmful, and in the worst case, carcinogenic. So we have to be very careful about all that. I'll sort of conclude this thing by leaving a little bit of food for thought here. Deepak mentioned about distributed solar, right? And maybe that's the right thing to do. And I want all of you to imagine a world where really we could do all these things in a very distributed manner, right? I have a house. I've got my electric vehicle. I'm taking out the material from that electric vehicle to convert it into a second application. What if I could actually recycle and then reuse the material and recreate the original material right there in my house? Could I do all this in a distributed manner? Dr. Mathur talked about bringing in good principles around recycling in the original design of the material, original design of the product. If we can do that, and if we can imagine a world where everyone can bring circularity at their very end, we would have done the right thing, we would have truly reduced the carbon impact, and we would have created truly a sustainable society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I personally have learned a lot in these 5-10 minutes, and I'm grateful to you. I have some questions over tea, but may I come to Ms. Sujata? I think you have the last word, but a disadvantage of having the last word is a little constraint for time also.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here. It's been truly a learning experience hearing all the subject matter experts talking about responsible renewable energy scaling. I represent Invest India. Just a brief of what we do. Basically, we are the Government of India's National Investment Promotion Agency. Our mandate is to promote India as the favorable destination for all investments, FDI basically. We also have the mandate of trade and R&D collaborations. My team, I belong to a vertical called Global Partnership and Net Zero Initiative. Our main vision is to make India the most attractive destination for net zero investments. The discourse on investment and especially FDI has changed in the last couple of years, where net zero energy transition is leading all the investment conversations. From India, though we are one of the most sought after destination for investment, we've been receiving almost the 8th largest in terms of receiving investments into our country. Our country is growing. We have great aspiration, economic aspiration. We are currently the 5th largest economy, and we want to be the 4th, 3rd, and currently at 4 trillion in GDP. We would want to be by 7 or 10 trillion by 2030. All that means is that our import should come down, our export should go up, make in India, make for the world. So our dependency on fossil fuel should come down drastically. So that means renewable energy is a very, very good opportunity for us as a country to meet the aspiration of the younger generation. We have, I think, employable population of almost 1 billion in India currently, out of which only 50% is employed, mostly because not many women are into the workforce. So when we are talking about renewable energy and we are talking about responsible renewable energy, we are not very confident that we will reach decarbonization or achieve our target, mainly because there's a great economic opportunity there. Even I'm considering this whole group, room full of people who are woke, who understand renewable energy and why we need to scale up in a responsible way. But even then we saw that at least 10% of us thought that even there will be trade-off, but still decarbonization should happen at any cost. And that is actually the narrative. There's nothing wrong in it because there is an economic value to it. So we will be reaching decarbonization, but are we reaching it in a responsible way so that it is sustainable for our generation? That is what we need to answer. Also, secondly, what we are internally, when we are presenting opportunities from India to global investors, what we see is traditionally when it comes to net zero or energy project, we see mostly power transmission straight off jacket, solar power or solar power parks is what we see. What we find as a challenge is how do we actually measure the multiplier effect? There are two projects, similar solar project. How do I prioritize one of them against another? So there has to be where we see the role of think tanks, academics, and CSOs is, can we create a framework where we also measure the impact of these projects into the community they work in, into the other environmental aspects they work for. Similarly, when we are talking about, Madam Dhawan mentioned that fertilizer, it is increasing because we need food consumption, right? We are a large population. We need to grow enough food to feed our population. But we also see on the other hand that tomatoes are being thrown away at some point and then it's being sold at 200, 250 kg per kg. So can we see interventions in terms of when we talk about any policy, any change? There's like Harvard professor Mark Moore's strategic triangle, which talks about that there should be a legitimacy and support to the policy. There should also be inherent public value and then operational capabilities. So when we are talking about renewable energy, when there are legislation, when there are initiatives by the government, when the government has this intent of becoming net zero by 2070, initiatives like solar parks, initiative like rooftop solars, so that there are only as much as a government can bring in terms of a legislation. What we see lacking currently is the public value for renewable energy. It's only driven top down. So can we create a need? Can we create an understanding and a behavioral change from the public? And so that will come only through many applications which are actually relevant to the day-to-day operations of people and in their livelihood. So for a farmer, yes, I should stop using a lot of fertilizer. But how do I store? Can I use solar energy? Can I use renewable energy to have a cold storage system at my place or at my panchayat level? So when I start applying renewable energy to scale up my own production and my own livelihood, that is when I will be able to appreciate. Similarly, we need to have operational capabilities. We are talking about solar rooftops. We are talking about end-use products. We are talking about recycling. We need to have responsible operational capabilities when we are bringing all these changes on the ground. So all of them have to go hand in hand so that we create a sustainable future and also that we come across as a leader, not only for our country, a lot of global south, we are the voice of global south. So any change which India is able to create domestically will actually have a profound impact in the future of the planet itself. We have the trust, we have the leadership position representing the global south. We should use this opportunity. We also see that there is no dearth of funding for projects. There is no dearth of funding. The main challenge we face as people who work with investors is how do we present these opportunities? How do we measure? What gets measured gets managed. So how do we measure the impact? And how do we tell people that these are the aspects? How do we tell corporates that these are the other aspects you need to look at so that we become a responsible society? Thank you.
Thank you. And I was glad to hear that resources are not a constraint if you got the thing right.
I was also wondering about that.
and we have, I'm sure, lots and lots of questions, but I think the organizers would like us to discuss it over tea rather than take time here. So let me thank each one of you for absolutely insightful comments, a lot of food for thought, and also maybe future work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. If you would like, we can take one or two questions from the audience. We can extend the TV by 5 minutes.
Hi, good morning. I am Ramneek from REI India. So we are focused on sustainability, but right now I'm going to talk like a layman. So you just mentioned behavioral change. That is, according to me, the key part, green mindsets. I'm now just talking to you about how conversations happen, especially when you look at the ICE vehicles transitioning to EVs. And I think Mr. Verma could be the right person to answer this. So the general question is that our grids are not green, it's brown. So almost 70-75% is coal. So that is one. Second is that what people or my friends or colleagues say is that in a way you're outsourcing pollution. So that's the advantage of driving in an EV in a city. I think overall it's less than 2%. The passenger vehicle market, the ICE is almost 98.3% as per what I read last. So how does the transition happen when people are not, even if they want to change, they have these questions and they also understand that when you talk about rare materials, a lot of energy.
May I respond? May I respond? Because I've been a crusader for EVs for 15 years. So number one is that you're right. Thermal electricity goes into the EV, so somewhere carbon emissions are taking place. But EVs are more energy efficient than the IC engines. So for the same fossil fuel source, carbon emissions are lower because EVs are more energy efficient. I have an opinion piece on that. I'll send it to you. The second is the share of renewable energy in India's grid has risen to 10%. Non-fossil fuel energy is 20%. So when you use electricity, you are using 20% less than when you burn petrol or diesel. Now, India is moving very rapidly to decarbonizing its electricity system, and 500 GW of non-fossil fuels will arrive by 2030. The share of renewables will be much larger. So you are going to see two converging trajectories. One is decarbonization of electricity, and the other is electrification of surface transport. When the two converge, in whichever country it happens, it's a quantum jump towards moving towards net zero. Somewhere 40-50% of carbon emissions will go. And which is why we are pushing the EV issue very strongly by government, and we are succeeding. And we are succeeding beyond expectations. And finally, running an EV is much cheaper. I've been driving an EV for 2 years. I save 5 rupees per kilometer that I drive.
And of course, we need public transport. Which serves all these purposes much better.
And there again, India has been a pioneer. There are 10,000 electric buses running in the country.
Last part of the question I couldn't complete was the green mindset part, that behavioral change. So my point of view is that the conversations need to be far more broad-based than being in the rooms like this. That is the...
We all agree with you. Each one of us should be a crusader in every conversation we have with everybody.
Thank you.
Can we have the mic, please?
Okay, sure. So, I sensed two things here, which I think Mr. Verma and Ms. Sirin mentioned, like the longevity and the circularity, and then Mr. Gupta mentioned something that I would refer to as self-sufficient energy communities. So like one thing which I would go by is like something that I think I did not hear a lot about was like storage, energy storage, and like these smaller communities which are like self-sufficient, right? So energy is not predictable, the sun is not predictable, the wind is not predictable, and you have to like have some leeway in terms of when the weather is not good for like, you know, like a day or like a day or two. So that's like one thing which I would want you guys to address. The other is like in circularity, which is longevity and recycling. Is it something that you see as like jobs, or is it something that is a basic skill that everyone should have, and how that integrates in these smaller communities where what do I do in terms of if we have these smaller energy communities and if we have coastal storage and everything, how do we take care of, because I don't think we can take care of the sourcing because that happens at like a larger level, but like can we actually, like can I as an individual actually manage the longevity and the circularity as an individual, and what skills do I need? Like, what does it look like, and what education do I need to be able to manage that?
I can take up a little bit of this. Certainly, storage is something that the world is working on. At this stage, I think we all understand storage is a bit expensive, which is why it has not become mainstream. The cost of storage plus the cost of solar is, or at least maybe even 6 months back, was rather high, but it is coming down substantially as we speak. And I think we've gotten to a level where storage plus solar has come down to something like 7 rupees a unit in our country. So those are excellent numbers from numbers which are sitting at 11 to 12 rupees just a couple of years back. The direction is absolutely the same, and where the technology is changing substantially is how to ensure a storage solution is a solution which can run for 10 years, 12 years, 13 years. That's the direction in which we are moving, and that direction is resulting in the cost coming down substantially. I do believe energy communities can become self-sufficient. I do believe they can actually become circular on their own, and that's something that we are very, very passionate about in our company. We do believe solutions can be modular. We do believe solutions can be deployed at a village level, at a community level, and not necessarily at a factory level. So I think that is very much possible, but then I think the core sort of the conversations that we need to have is to ensure that the entire industry is working together in this. The original products need to be designed in such a manner that they enable circularity at a micro level. And I think that discussion has started happening, not just in, certainly in other parts of the world. There are big DIY communities in other parts of the world which know how to do this. And I think we need to bring those solutions to the mainstream. And more importantly, we need to educate everyone about those solutions. I think we all have talked a little bit about education, talent, green skilling. I think that is really the fundamental need of the hour.
Thank you so much.
She has one comment.
Can we
Just 2 cents. If you're interested in business models on how these things are working, there are actually models where local communities and decentralization is the way to go forward in involving the SHGs. There are multiple models which have been funded by the NABARDs of the world and the SRLMs, where decentralized renewables have been used for productive applications, and with or without storage. That is with or without storage. So if you're interested, just look around for different business models which are already there.
Yeah, maybe I'll also like to add here, and what we haven't discussed at all is biogas, and especially the compressed biogas, which can play a very important role in rural economy and also treating agriculture residue.
Thank you so much to our speakers and moderator for moderating this session. It was indeed a very learning experience for myself as well.